Hello and welcome back to Talent Thrives Here, our podcast where we talk about talent, talent management, talent retention, talent engagement, anything to do with the workplace and looking after people and working with people. My special guest today is Dr. Amy Narishkin. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so fun to be here with you, Lance.
It's great to have you on the show this morning. Amy and I met, I think, maybe a few years ago. It might have been during the pandemic. I believe we met on an HR webinar, and if I recall, I asked a question about um, somebody had said, "I don't believe in racism," I think was the question,
Yeah.
and in the workplace, and I was just like, well, that's kind of a lot to unpack there. And you actually, I believe, wrote a blog article about it, and then we started chatting. And I took one of your DEI courses, which I thought was amazing to sort of do for some people, really a lot of mental gymnastics, of how they had to unpack various things and their own status quo, basically. But I remember finding the people involved in the course really interesting because some of them were really wrestling with some of these things in the workplace, right? Some of the
Yeah, they
challenges of,
were
a changing dynamic workplace. And so
all the way
I,
across kind of that continuum of, is there even racism to, oh my God, how can you not appreciate it? And just, yeah, that whole mix in the room makes for intriguing training.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So your company, Empowering Partners, you focus specifically on dealing with various cultural challenges in the workplace. Correct me if I'm wrong. Would that be fair to say that, or give us a little bit more meat on that sort of that explanation?
I hadn't thought of in terms of dealing with cultural challenges. Typically, Uh, I think you're pretty spot on. Typically, an organization reaches out to me when they've got pretty high attrition. I'm working with
Mhm.
a credit union right now, and they've got 30 or so, 30% attrition,
Yeah.
and they're trying to figure out why people are walking out the door. Another organization, and I'm allowed to say it because they've given me permission, the National Council of Jewish Women, which, as you know, are minorities in disguise in a sense
Mm,
because they
mm, mm.
identify as white people, but bombs go off in synagogues, so it's very much a reality of historic marginalization there.
Yeah.
And even though here in the St. Louis metro area where they serve, these are highly educated philanthropic women and are serving a predominantly Black community, but they
Mm,
didn't call me because they wanted to do a better job. They thought they were doing a pretty good job serving their population that was very much part of who they are and how they identified. What they wanted to figure out was how to stop to stem the tide of the younger Jewish women leaving.
mm.
They were kind of
Right.
scratching their head going, why is the younger generation leaving? So to your point, they are cultural issues because
Yeah.
they're trying to figure out whether, it's racial differences or generational differences or um, differences in ability. You and I were talking before you hit record about being neuroatypical and
Right.
appreciating people who are neuroatypical.
Yeah.
And how can we see that those various differences as an asset
Mm,
and
mm.
take advantage of that to reach an even broader market? So
Yeah.
that's my work in a nutshell.
Great. Yeah.
Really awesome.
I thank you for that. That's helpful because I don't know if you look at the media anywhere or anything right now. There's so many shifting tides, right? There's so many different sort of challenges. The thing I hear on social media all the time is woke or wokeism or things like that, and
Yeah,
it gets a lot of airplay, especially on social media.
yeah.
Um, but it says to me, there are old guard, new guard kind of things. There are status quo or a dominant culture um,
True.
that used to be more dominant and now has a different mix. And I think of even where I live when I was a kid. The demographic was radically different than it is today, like 40, 50 years later. Our
Right.
our cultural and racial mix in our city has doesn't look anything like what it was when I was a
Right.
child, right?
And in our country as well. And what you're talking about is kind of back in the day that sometimes people are holding up as saying the ideal. which is around 1959, often is the ideal in people's mind, which is
Yeah.
pre a lot of stuff that we know today. But we were about 84% white in this country at that point.
Right.
And
Right.
and now we're just over 50%. So just that change in demographics
Yeah.
is significantly influence how we engage with one another and just what we're thinking and talking about because we're
Y-
bumping into differences all the time. But
Yeah.
can
Well,
I
sorry. Go
explain
ahead.
kind of, oh, I apologize. I was just
No, no,
thinking
I
about
jumped in. You go ahead.
uh, what makes it awkward for people. And
Mm,
so often you use the term dominant culture. Do you mind if I just define that?
sure.
Is
Please
that
do. Yeah. Yeah.
okay?
That'd be great.
So every organization of people has a culture, right? I mean, you and I both know that. Whether it's your home, you definitely have a culture in your home, your place of worship, your work, your community, your city, your country, all all have a culture. Anytime you have a group of people, you have a culture, and a culture to a group is what a personality is to a person. It's kind
Mm,
of how they do life together.
right. Right.
And so when we're talking about dominant culture, that term that you use is sometimes off-putting to some people. So I just get it out there. Every organization of people has a dominant culture. And by dominant, I don't mean you in particular are dominating. It's just
Right.
the group of people, um, often historically, that are making the rules
Yep.
for other people, as opposed to the non-dominant cultures who are not kind of in charge
Right.
of influencing and making the rules for other people. So in the
Yep.
case of an example would be like in your kid's school, a principal puts in play a dominant culture and each classroom has a non-dominant culture. And
Mm,
they coexist. One is just ultimately in charge and calling the shots. And also the personalities shift that, certainly. Um, but there are, in general, rules that people have to abide by.
right.
Um,
Right.
and what I was going to say, I totally forget now that I've defined those words. What were we talking about? Oh my gosh. Um,
That's, Amy, if I could segue for a second into something else,
yeah,
because
let's do it.
you talked about, I think neurodiverse or and one of the things we talked about earlier, just prior to this call, was sort of celebrating, ADHD, if you could use that term, or ADD, or
Sure.
and and I was having a chat with someone a few weeks ago, and they said, some of the greatest inventions in life, in history, in our Western world, probably came at the hands of people who were neurodiverse in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
and so if you think of like Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci, the Renaissance man was building war machines and beautiful sculpture and painting, and this is like,
Yeah, right. And architecture and all that. Yeah.
yeah, they're not staying in a one lane. They are all over the highway with their creative juice. It's, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that too. And so um I quite often, I mentioned to you, I was in a studio recently doing some recording, and um, I'm always amazed at where something can be a superpower or a weakness. It could be like a curse or a blessing. I always used to refer to it as the double-edged sword, right? In the
Right.
right place, your superpower is amazing, and in the wrong place, not so much, right? It sort of wrecks things sometimes if it's in the
Right.
wrong application of the wrong lane. And correct me if I'm wrong, is that some of the work you do around different personalities in the workplace and how they bring their expectations to the
Yeah.
workplace and to a group they're working with, and then how do you figure out the dynamics of that group, and basically if you're a leader and this is your team and maybe they've all come to the table looking for something different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
You can't
yeah.
give the same sort of incentive or reward to everybody because it's not incentivizing to some people. So I'm curious to just, pick your brain on something like that.
It's an interesting point that in the right place at the right time, it's a superpower. In other instances, it can be a blockade.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what you're talking about is how, correct me if I'm wrong, you're wondering how does a leader take um, the opportunity to see people's individuality, their uniqueness, their stories and see them as an asset and embrace them so that they can potentially reach more people like them and even reach a
Yeah.
broader market. Am I understanding your question
Yeah,
correctly?
absolutely. Because we in the workplace, we're often, here's my analogy always. Imagine you built this team of 8 people to do a project, whatever the project is. Could be a software development or anything. Um, and one of the people on your team reminds you of Robin Williams. All right. So
Yeah, I feel you. Yeah,
you've got this zany clown-like energy, and you're like, oh boy, this is going to take the whole group off down a rabbit hole somewhere,
yeah,
potentially. So, managing sort of a challenging personality. And also, if you are the leader and that person is specifically on your team, how do you manage that? How do you keep the group together? Because by the same token of having that wild and zany personality, you may also have some introverts, you may have some extroverts, you may have a real, as always, people are a blend
yeah,
and different, and they show up different at different times depending on the chemistry in the room. So, imagine I've come to you for a training course, and Amy, here's my group. I've got this zany Robin Williams type over here who's just full of energy, bursting. And I've got these other folks that are not as wild and dynamic, but massively talented in other areas.
yeah,
How do I manage this team of disparate kind of individuals? And how, what is some of the coaching and how do I, because this person's going to set them off. I've got
sure.
I've got one of these
Sounds
things
like
doesn't
you
belong here or isn't like
ultimately
the others. Sorry?
I apologize. I interrupted. I thought you were coming to a close. It it sounds like you've had some experience with group dynamics such as this.
Never,
Yes?
Amy. I can't imagine. That's ridiculous. Why would you say that? Why would you? No, but
It's
you,
intriguing that you're asking me this question right on the heels of me writing a blog called How to Maximize Group Engagement.
mm,
I
mm,
just published that blog a couple of weeks ago. And
perfect.
the answer to your question is very similar to a question a woman asked me. She's a professional facilitator, and the current political climate in the United States, people want to chime in with their different perspectives. And she asked me, similar to what you're saying, how do I manage that? And you can certainly read my blog, and a short
All right.
answer to your question. And my blog is probably 1,200 word answer, but a
Yeah.
short answer to your question is setting expectations for behavior within the group. And in
Right.
fact, what's even cooler is if you can set those expectations together. And those
Mm,
expectations need to be behavior specific,
right.
like
Right.
allowing someone to finish. It could be paraphrasing what you heard before adding your own idea. It could be staying on topic. And if you have a question that's off topic, make sure that you write it down on that post-it and submit it or email it to me. You
Right.
can put in little techniques and tricks that are actually in my blog. And what's really meaningful is if you can uh, come up with that or review a list together and determine which ones you like and don't like and what's going to work for your group.
Yeah.
Because what works for your group may not work for my group. So it's coming up with those communication guidelines for your group,
Yeah.
specifically for your group. And then it's important that those guidelines allow room for that individuality, that we're going to allow people within the confines of the topic to go off on tangents and
Right.
appreciate them. But you can also put into your guidelines that the first go around of sharing, everybody has 3 minutes and everyone in the room shares. And
Ah,
then we open it up.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so sometimes neuroatypical people are the introverts, and
Right.
they may not necessarily be inclined to participate in a group setting. So
Yes.
one thing a leader can do is before a meeting, just check in with those introverts via email or stop by their office and
Yeah.
ask, is there anything that you want to share? And you're giving them some think time. So
Yeah.
when you send out an agenda and you can actually invite people, if you wanted to give me any feedback ahead of time and I can share it for you or open up the space for you to share it, you let me know.
Yeah.
So those are some techniques. How does that land on you, Lance?
Oh, it's very interesting that we said that because you're basically putting guardrails on communication, right? Saying, hey, we can go all over the road,
Yeah,
but I'd like to kind of contain the communication inside here, please.
yeah.
And if you go off, we'll bring you back.
How
You
can we
know,
do that together. What's very motivating is if people are part of the process of
Yeah.
development of those communication guidelines.
Yeah, it reminded me when you were talking of a incident years ago where we had an outside consultant coming in to do organizational behavior conversations and group think and a number of different sort of team building sort of exercises. And I remember specifically two individuals on the executive team who, like, you could hear their feet hitting the carpet, like to put the brakes on the whole thing. They were like, "Oh no, I don't do this in front of other people. I really am uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable having this conversation, you know." And so, I was thinking this will be a great seminar for us. We're all going to bond. We're going to have a great time. We're going to have, and you could see two people like just sweating bullets, like, no, 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 no. I didn't
So
invite
uncomfortable.
this. I
So
didn't
uncomfortable.
invite this. I didn't want it. These are very senior executives who just went. And so I'd never seen them in that light before.
Right.
Because, we go in and we talk about what we need to talk about on a day-to-day basis every day. And this was sort of in their minds, not in the cards, not on the job description. I didn't sign up for this, nor do I want to be exposed in front of all these people that normally have to report to me, so, but I remember thinking, wow, this is going to be an interesting couple of days with this offsite and
Yeah. Yeah.
trying to get disparate kind of folks to open up, share, and hopefully in there grow a little bit with the group or have other people around them grow by the knowledge that they share. But yeah, it was a very challenging few
It
days.
can be challenging when you're in a group setting and you've got a couple of people like that, where they're the head of the company or just, middle management or line workers. In
Yeah.
any case, when you're really hoping that people will chime in, what you get to do is hold your expectations a little bit more lightly and move in with a good intention of including everyone. So,
Mm,
one way to act into the intention of including everyone is give everyone a post-it
mm,
and ask everyone to answer the question in their own way.
mm.
And then if it's a really large group, you can ask people to share with the partner next to them.
Right.
And so,
Right.
and then open it up for group participation. And if you want, you can just go around, kind of around the circle or around the room, and please give people the opportunity to pass. Because
Yeah.
your intention is already met, you've got 100% participation already, because you've got 100% of people have already written down their own answer, and
Mm,
100% of people that have already been in a pair. And the lovely thing about pairs versus tables of 8 or tables of 4 is nobody can hide in a pair.
right. Right. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's
Interesting.
it's it's not too hard to get people engaged as long as you allow them to do it on their terms. And this is what I'm teaching, Lance. I'm teaching cultural intelligence, which is
Right.
compassion for people within their context. I can be nice to you all day long, but if it's not nice in a way that's meaningful for you, it
Right.
can really fall flat. And so that's what I'm training leaders to do, either in workshops or with executive coaching. How,
Yeah.
some people want it one-on-one, is helping people hear other people so that they can get their stories and get that context. You
Yeah.
get their context, you appreciate, for example, somebody who's in a wheelchair or needs some kind of accommodation,
Yeah.
and you're gonna have a dedicated employee for life,
Right.
because there just
Right.
aren't that many people seeing others and valuing them and
Yeah.
willing to make small accommodations. Sometimes an accommodation is a prayer mat in the bathroom,
Yes. Yeah.
and they'll stay forever, right?
Yeah.
It's not, you were asking, how do you make accommodations for individuals? The simple answer is ask,
Right. Right.
what do you need to feel safe here?
Hmm. Yeah, a good, very good point. Because that's the challenge I think in a lot of company cultures is you roll out a bunch of programs thinking, yeah, that's kind of going to hopefully hit most of the people.
Right,
But I can remember literally reorganizing an office space years ago, and we had to absorb a lounge and put workstations into that lounge, and we were really busy at the time, adding lots of employees to the company. And, the lounge just had to go away. We needed the space. We couldn't afford to grow outside the building. But
right.
what I found really interesting was the number of emails coming in And hey, where am I going to do this now? Where am I going to, like, the people that have been
Right.
using that lounge, not everyone used it, but clearly the community that had been impacted was quite vocal about, hey, is the company going to add another lounge at some point down the road, or is there another space off site or somewhere else we can go to do the things we used to do here?
What
Um,
you're naming here is a problem. Did I allow you to finish?
I got to it. Amy,
Okay.
please. Okay.
What you're naming here is the problem with top-down initiatives and lovely intention,
Hmm,
and so often they don't land well. And it's
right,
heartbreaking when a CEO has rolled something out and it made a lot of investment and it's not working. And
right.
so in this era, when people need to be accommodated in order to stick around,
Yep.
a bottom-up initiative is going to be a whole lot more effective and cost efficient because more people will buy in. When people are being asked by their immediate boss, uh, what are your, I often give bosses 3 questions that they can ask their direct reports each week. What are you working on? What are you working on next? And how can I help? Just
Hmm,
those 3 questions. And that that line worker boss, who, what would you call the boss of a factory floor? Operations guy,
sure.
or gal is asking those 3 questions. And then that operations person is reporting to middle management, and that middle manager is asking those same 3 questions of their direct reports. And then it just keeps going up. And then the CEO has what, a team of 10 or 20 people reporting to them, and they're asking, and all of this information is getting to the top from the bottom. So it's not like the CEO has to go out and interview everybody, right? It's just each boss at each level being aware of the needs and hearing people. So one of the things that is really helpful to know, that most of us educators know, that when you put in place in a classroom, I'll just back up and give you my context. I'm 58 years old and I've been a teacher since I was 22, right? In a classroom. And I started out with kids in classrooms, and now I work with grown-ups in boardrooms.
Right.
So back in the day when I was teaching 5th grade, that was the very first year. I think I started teaching in 1988. And that was the first year or thereabouts that the state of Massachusetts, where I was working, required us by law to reach and teach every kid. And uh, kids with disabilities were mainstreamed into regular
Right.
ed classrooms. And I had
Yeah.
to teach them all.
Wow.
And one of the things that, and it wasn't that I didn't have help, because certainly there were assistants in the room, but I was in charge of the curriculum. And at the end of the day, making sure kids got from point A to point B by the end of the academic year. And one of the things that this young teacher figured out really quick was when I made uh, kind of top-down changes in the classroom, a lot of times the kids who were historically marginalized, the kids with disabilities, they get lost. But anytime I made accommodations for the kids with so-called disabilities or different abilities, neuroatypical, for example, um, it was of benefit to the dominant culture kids, the
Hmm,
regular ed kids.
hmm,
And actually research shows it's called universal design. When you make accommodation for minorities, it benefits everybody. But when you only accommodate the majorities, people are left out. And so
right.
that might
Right.
be helpful for leaders to know that when you are making these small adjustments in your workplace, it helps everybody. And I can give you an example. Can I give you an example?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm thinking about, well, one of the things that I'm thinking about in my classroom, for example, I learned very quickly to put up an agenda on the board for the day.
Hmm,
And my kids who were neuroatypical, or my kids who were big picture people who literally can't learn unless they understand where you're going, on the agenda, I would put what the class is, but what the intended outcome was.
mhm.
So the people who needed to know where we were headed in order for it to stick, everybody could take a breath. And it was of benefit to everyone in the classroom because everyone knew where we're headed, even if you didn't need to know. So that was kind of like, wow. And anytime I was going to give more than 2-step directions, I'd write them on the board for my visual learners, because only auditory people can hear 3 or more steps. So, but everyone benefits to be able to check back on the board. Oh, I'm on step 4. Okay,
Yeah.
right? Not, it takes a lot of pressure off. So what you're doing is creating a safe space by accommodating these kids who learn differently, and kind of a more universal idea that you might recognize in everyday life is curb cuts. So after World War II, a lot of people came back from the war with disabilities, and
Right.
sidewalks didn't have ramps,
Ah, right. I remember that. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it really wasn't almost until we got to the Korean and Vietnam War that
Yeah.
curb cuts became universal. But if you
Right.
think about it, not everybody needs a curb cut, but it's not just people in wheelchairs. You
Right.
know, parents with strollers, kids on skateboards, so
Absolutely.
many people who have trouble stepping up, so many
Yeah.
people benefit from curb cuts. And now that's part of universal design. So that's just an
Yes.
example of accommodating minorities, but benefiting so, majorities too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to get
It's
down
it.
off my soapbox and now.
No, I think it's a great soapbox. I like it because it's funny because I'd forgotten all about that. Because now, I was when you said that, I immediately had an image of a corner about 2 blocks from my house where they just redid it last year. And
Yeah,
so I can remember, this now it has a slope. It also has sort of there's a raised sort of little nubby things. I think for people who are blind with their cane, they can feel this sort of traction plate. They know they're
right,
close to the
right.
edge, right?
Beautiful.
And
Yeah.
and they put those in the subway trains as well years ago, right along the edge of the platform. These sort of knobby little things, so that anybody who's visually impaired would be able to feel that, oh, I'm within 12 inches of the edge of the platform now, right?
Right.
And I don't think they're universal, but I think they're in a lot of subway stations now
Yeah.
in many cities. But yeah, to your point, that the design change is now kind of, it's the standard. And
It
when I was a
becomes the
kid,
standard,
when
and at first it's really kind of breaking with the status quo, and you'll get
yeah,
pushback, and you just plan on it. It's not going to get pushed back forever. It might
right.
be a couple of weeks or might be a couple of months when you start an initiative
Mm,
from the bottom up. Um, but eventually it normalizes. And
yeah.
I would love to speak to normalizing.
Okay.
Can I
No,
share an idea?
absolutely. Please. Yeah.
When we're going through life and what's normal for us, we tend to not notice needs for accommodations, right? It's a
Mm,
lot like being right-handed in a right-handed world. When you're
mm,
part of the dominant culture, it's like being right-handed in right-handed world. You don't know that it works for you. You
right.
don't know that it works
Yes.
for you until you're a mom like me who has
Yeah.
4 adult children, but my second 2 children are lefties.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was a 5th grade teacher, and I
Right.
didn't know how hard it was for kids until I had 2 lefties, and the spiral gets in the way, the desk doesn't support you, and let's
Yes.
not even talk about scissors and can openers, right?
Or baseball mitts and hockey sticks. Quite frankly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're part of the dominant culture, you're not
Yeah.
gonna necessarily see what it's like, and it's not your fault.
Right.
And that's
Right.
one of the things that with cultural intelligence, um, sometimes I can be a real shithead. Sometimes I can totally not see what it's like for somebody else. But that's the human brain, right? We walk around with what's
Yeah.
normal for us, and we're like, and maybe that's what originally the term woke meant. I'm not
Mm,
sure always what it means today, but it's being awake, being aware, being sensitive to what
sure.
it's like for someone else. And
Right.
that kind of very gentle definition is a process. Awakening is what I'm doing all the time because I have a point of view, a view from just one point. And
Right.
until
Right.
somebody comes along and says, "Hey man, this is what it's like for me,"
Yeah.
it's like now my response is no longer awkward. I'm an idiot. I'm a shithead. Now it's, I had no idea. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you touched on several points in there, and it reminded me of sort of a multicultural family where you've got very distinctly different cultures marrying in. I
Yeah. Yeah.
think probably gets exposed early in life to, oh well, this was Whereas if there are two people with very similar backgrounds married together, I mean, I'm using that personal sort of side, but the same in a company, right? Where you have again, a culture where it's more homogenous, let's say.
Sure. Yep.
There's,
It's quite normal.
and so going back to the person who doesn't kind of identify with that main or
Sure.
dominant
Dominant
or
culture.
um it's really hard for that larger group, not really hard, it's harder sometimes for them to realize, oh, we've got to chat with these folks and make sure everyone's included, make sure that if we're designing anything, it should be a little bit more collaborative. We should check our, even do a survey or something like that to get
Yeah.
some input so that we're designing with everyone more in place. I mean, I work a lot in the entertainment
Beautiful.
business, and as you know, it has changed dramatically with just a few years ago, we were seeing things like the vice president of diversity and inclusion. That title I'd never heard of 25 years ago.
Right.
Never. It
Right.
was never even, it was, if you look through the org chart, nope, not here, right?
Right.
And so, we've seen all sorts of large companies start to say, well, we've got to do this. And really big challenges along the way, as you know, because sometimes someone says, this is a great idea and we need to implement it, but they actually don't know how to implement it, right? And
Right.
they've never done this before, and so their good intentions go sideways, and then they rebound into like the safer place again. They go back to, well, that didn't work, we've got to, and so, and I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is part of where your company and your superpowers come in as that kind of guide. I like to think of like Sherpa, we'll help you get up the mountain together. I'm not going to carry all your stuff though, but
Yeah.
here's how we get it up the mountain, right? So
We'll get up the mountain together. We'll become more aware together, because I'm not promising that I'm any more aware of other people's experiences than you are or my client is.
right,
The skill set I have is what questions to ask, how to open up the conversation. Like we
right,
talked about how to maximize group instruction,
yeah,
and group engagement, I should say. You could hear the
sure,
teacher right there. How to maximize group engagement, uh, because to your point, we default to the dominant culture,
yeah,
and uh, unless we are particularly and intentionally aware almost every day,
yeah,
keeping the keeping top of mind the fact that there are differences in the room, even when we appear to be all the same. I
mm,
remember at one point I was working with a Lutheran pastor. He wanted to reach the Hispanic community outside his church in a rural part of Minnesota. And he said to me, "How how can I see them when we're an all white church?" And I
right,
said, "It's really interesting, that kind of broad brushstroke statement about all white church, because of course it appears that you all identify with that particular aspect of dominant culture, but I just wonder how many veterans haven't mentioned their stories, or how many people are struggling with depression, or how many
right,
women object to always being preached at by a man. I
yeah,
wonder who's not sharing their pain."
right,
And he got really quiet and he said, "There's probably a lot more diversity in my church than I realize." And I said,
yes,
"Will you open up that space, maximize group engagement, and not just always hear from the extroverted powerhouse people, but hear from those quieter, tender voices, even the children
yeah,
in your church, right? And particularly those with disabilities." Um, the kicker is when those people feel so seen and so loved in your church, the love is just going to spill out into the community. People are going to say, "I want a part of that." And then the people
right.
in the church are going to say, "You got to come be with me. This is such a cool church." And then I just quietly and gently, because I was not in a secular space anymore, I said, "If you think about it, Father, where's the kingdom of heaven? And I got to say, remember, the kingdom of heaven's within you. The love starts inside the organization, inside you, and then it'll just bubbles out and ripples out from there. And it was like, I get it. I
Mm.
get it. I think his preaching changed a little bit too.
That's great. A lovely story. And the other thing I was thinking when you were mentioning that too is like, this predominantly white congregation, how diverse are their backgrounds and their families, and because I think we've discussed this probably years ago. My mom was born in India, and we were in India for many generations, our family, and so um, growing up, that was a great influence for me because I was in a predominantly white Anglo-Saxon neighborhood, and Christmas was turkey. There's traditions, these very British born traditions in the neighborhood, and any kid walking into our house at that time of year would smell curry and dal and rice and cinnamon and ginger, and and they'd be like, what the hell is your mom doing? What's going on?
He's ruining Christmas.
Yeah, where's the cranberry sauce? What are you guys up to here? This is some sort of weird magic. And but again, if I was in that church, we would present as, Caucasian white folks, blah, blah, blah. Like, but we had this rich history. And at the time, another small anecdote was, I remember people, this is in the late 60s and 70s, they'd say like, where do I go in the city for good Indian food? And I say, you go to my grandmother's house. That's the best Indian food in the whole city,
Yes.
And now if they said it, I'd be like, oh, 2 blocks from me, there's a great place. And then another 2 blocks, there's another great place. But back when I was a kid, there was none of that. It was still very much, everything was closed on Sundays. Nothing was open except for church, and everything
It's an
shut down.
example of how the demographics have shifted in the United States and in Canada too, right?
Yeah. And our population now, we had 1,000 kids in my high school, and I'd say 995 were probably from the same part of Western Europe if you track their backgrounds, more or less, right?
Right.
Ukrainians, Polish, Germans, French, Italian, etc. And now if I look at that high school, the mix of folks is completely radically different, right, than what it was when I was a kid going to high school there. And I think positively, I mean, it's just the way that the countries have shifted and changed their immigration. Everything's changed a lot, but and again, to the workplace, Amy, I was going to say, just to the workplace, it's like I was dealing with a couple of CEOs in the last couple of years, and some of them are in their late 60s and early 70s, and they're wrestling. This is not the place they grew up either. They're wrestling with, how do I communicate with this changing landscape right in front of me? It's not comfortable for them,
When you're no longer as much part of the dominant culture, as the dominant culture is shifting and morphing in how it looks, it's disconcerting for people who are historically part of the dominant culture too. And that's the beauty of cultural intelligence, is that we all need to feel seen, not just a particular group, but we all need to feel seen and valued. Just welcome to being human. Remember a little bit ago, I mentioned the National Council of Jewish Women, and one of the younger Jewish women that it actually stayed part of the organization, when she and I were having a one-to-one, she was quiet, and I asked her, what's going on? What are you thinking about? And she said, I'm not sure it's our time. And I said,
wow,
can you help me understand what that means? And she said, it's Black people's time. It's their time.
wow.
And I said, oh, I appreciate that you're feeling with a group of people that have just been so marginalized for so long. And there's so much statistics around kind of the unfairness in society about how they've been treated. I appreciate your heart. And I have a question for you. May I ask you a question? And she said, yeah. And I said, bombs go off in synagogues, right? And she said, yeah. And I said, could it be that it's their time? and it's your time too? Does
Right.
it have
Right.
to be one or the other?
Hmm.
Does it have to be kind of that binary way of
Right.
thinking? Or
Yeah.
can it be,
Yeah.
we all need to to feel seen and valued, and the conversation is gonna go based on the person you're talking with at the time. Because
Hmm.
context always matters. So if you're talking with an African American woman, for example, maybe let her go first. Maybe let her share her story. But the really cool thing about the way we're wired as social animals, because we are social beings, is that when you give someone the gift of deep listening and gentle question asking, it's natural for them to want to hear your story. And this is the beautiful thing about cultural intelligence, is that you know you've won when you both win,
Mm.
when you
Wow.
both feel seen and valued, whether that's a black and a white, a man and a woman, a child and a parent. You want to walk away from situations, scenarios, experiences, encounters where both of you feel seen. And the one with cultural intelligence, like you and I practice cultural intelligence, we're going to have to let them go first because we
Mm.
know, let them go first, let them tell their story. So I'm just going to segue back to a point you made a minute ago. When you've got a person who's been part of the dominant culture for a long time and they're feeling kind of hogtied by all these demographic differences, do I count? Do I matter? And so let's just talk about white men in the United States. And they're
Mm.
still very much in charge. There are more CEOs of Fortune 500 companies named John than there are
Right.
female CEOs, right?
Right. Right.
So, and 72% of voices that you hear in popular media, in games and movies and television shows and the radio, 72% are male and
Wow.
predominantly white, and that's around the world, right? And
Mm.
we're not even a predominantly white world, but
Right.
it's predominantly white male voices around the world. So what that inadvertently communicates is that other voices aren't quite worth hearing.
Mm.
And so when a gentleman might say to me, what can I do in this era where I don't count? I want to say, oh, you're so cute that you think you don't count, right? Because your voice still rocks. And what you can do when you come across someone that seems different, that you kind of feel awkward, you don't know what to say or do, is you
Yeah.
can learn their story. Let them
Mm.
go first. Ask
Wow.
them, what's it like for you? And I'm
Mm.
and I'm thinking about this. May I give an example of what you might do?
Please. Please. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yesterday, my husband and I have a sailboat, and there's a gentleman that is redoing the cushions. It's a 1984 sailboat. So you can imagine the cushions inside the boat needed to be refurbished. And I found a gentleman to redo our cushions, and he brought them to the house. Well, I'm married to a foreign-born national, a guy that didn't grow up in the US. And so he tends to be always aware of people that are different because he's different. Even though he's a white guy, he grew up all over the world. He's developed an American accent because he was in American schools all over the world. But my husband speaks 4 languages. He's lived in 5 countries. And so you know he's aware of other foreign-born
Right.
nationals, right?
Right.
This guy comes in and drops off this boatload, pun intended, maybe, boatload of cushions, right? Um, Puts them down, and my husband immediately notices the guy has a baseball hat on, but it's the symbol of the Ukraine.
Right.
And I didn't know where this gentleman was from, but Cyril, my husband, knew in a moment.
Mm.
And all he said was, man, I feel you. Do you have family there?
Mm.
And that was all he had to say. The man got quiet and he said, no immediate family.
Wow.
But then he went on to tell his story.
Right.
And it took maybe 5 or 7 minutes.
Yeah.
But I wrote him a check and the man just said, you have the loveliest home. Thank you for welcoming me in. I'm not sure my home is all that, but he felt seen, and it didn't
Yeah.
take long. It didn't take long, and I think a lot of my cultural intelligence comes from being married to a guy who notices what it's like for other people,
Yeah.
and And he was the one that pointed out to me that American dollar bills, US currency, are all the same size and same color.
Yeah.
And I didn't, having grown up mostly in Europe, he knows that the bills are different sizes and colors. They accommodate people who don't see well,
Yeah.
and never noticed that, how you could be taken advantage of if you're blind.
Right. Right. Wow.
It doesn't take long to make sure somebody feels seen. A doctor in the United States, research shows, can cut their litigation in half if they spend an extra 3 minutes with their patients.
Wow. Great statistic. Wow. Huh.
Just being with somebody and asking a gentle question, what's it like? What
Yeah.
happened to you? Puts us in a powerful position to really hear someone out and then make accommodations accordingly.
Right. Right. Excellent. Amy, I'm just cognizant of time. We've had a great chat, and I think you and I could, chat again. There's lots of topics that we come across. So,
Time
it's
flies with you, Lance. Time flies with you. It's just, I'm on a podcast probably a couple of times a year. Somebody will interview me, and I go deeper with you when I talk than anybody else. You're just extraordinary to be with.
well,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Amy. I think we're probably like two shoes. Because again, the things you and I talk about when we have chats are very near and dear to our professional and personal heart, I think,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah. We're part of the same tribe, Lance.
that's right.
Our tribe are the folks who can imagine a more compassionate world and want
Mm,
to be part of that solution.
right, right.
That's our tribe.
Absolutely. Amy, if people want to find you, Dr. Amy Narishkin, I'm sure you're on LinkedIn. Your
Yeah.
company is Empowering Partners. Is there, I know you've got empoweringpartners.com as your website. Is there
I
any
do.
other spots they should look for you, or are those the two main conduits to get
Tho-
to you?
Those are the two main. I know I should be on other social media,
That's
but
fine.
I am a solopreneur and I definitely have co-teachers, but I can only manage that one piece of social media is
Sure,
LinkedIn. And most
sure.
folks find me there or on my website, empoweringpartners.com. And one
Yeah.
of the things, I write a monthly blog, and that's on my website, and I often post them on LinkedIn too. If you want to learn, the thing that I'll tell you is on my website. I just published, and it took 2.5, 3 years to make an online self-study course so
Mm,
that you can learn the skills to talk with people who seem different to you, however you define difference. And it's 6 lessons in this course. And a fifth grade teacher developed it. So there's all these interactives and color and case studies. And
right.
it's just, and yeah, it's not big university, but it sits on Maryville University's platform. So
Okay.
a university uh, adopted it, and that's where I sell it from there. But
Great.
with 6 sessions, you'll learn 2 to 3 skills with each lesson, and each lesson takes 30 to 40 minutes.
Mm,
And it's $423, and you're going to have a whole toolbox of knowing how to work with people just seem quite different to you.
it's
And
great.
I just love that. I just
Yeah.
love spreading the love.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you once again. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation as I always do. We always have a great chat. So, and hopefully we can have you back several months down the road and chat about, we could even pick a couple of key topics and try and stay on topic instead
We
of
could try to stay I don't know. We're two neuroatypical people. We're pretty
right.
radical. Thank you.
All
Oh,
right.
if you want to find the blog that I wrote for Lance, it's on my website, How to Deal with an Ignorant Remark in 5 Steps.
Wow.
That's Lance's.
All right. Thanks. I mean, I think you
Yeah.
called me Larry too. I thought that was good. That's my ghost name now. I'm going to adopt that.
Larry.
Didn't you in the
Yeah.
article? Anyways,
Oh,
not to
you're
worry.
right. I always change people's names, and you're
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. You were
In the
protecting the
blog,
innocent
new
and the
article.
guilty yeah, I
You're
appreciate
like,
that.
I wanted to protect you, but now I'm calling you out. I didn't protect you.
Yeah. Oh well. It's
Oh
all
well,
good. It's all good. We'll survive.
you're
Thank you
awesome.
again, Amy. Lovely
Thank
having
you.
you on the show, and hopefully we can have a chat again soon. Take
I
care.
look forward to it, Lance. Take it easy.
Great.
Bye.
Bye bye.